So this week, as I said, we're focused on what does it mean to be missionaries who plant the gospel in their network of relationships. When we talked about that huge vision, of filling everything in every way and bringing unity between heaven and earth, that's such a big thing. But I want to make sure that we focus on what does that mean to us. And so when we talk about planting the gospel in our network of relationships, it's how do you do that? How do you see that big vision get down to your own network of relationships where in your sphere of influence, have you been able to help all the people experience the love of God and then also hear his story. One thing we talked about was any strategy that doesn't mobilize every kind of person will not reach every kind of person. And that's so important because we're talking about thinking of things in a new way. What type of strategy will reach that huge goal that we talked about? So any strategy that doesn't mobilize every kind of person will not reach every kind of person. So what does that mean? There needs to be a structure of our churches where everyone has space to become a leader. And I broke that into 3 bullet points here of every person listening for what God is calling them to. We're going to get into detail on that next week in our personal discovery. Some tools to help each of us be able to listen better to what God might be calling us to. And then every person equipped to follow that calling. So, that calling could look like anything from big to small. I was in a group recently where a woman, I believe she was a nurse, was like, I want to start this medical facility and service ministry, and it was just this huge awesome thing. And that's an example of like a really big thing, and it wasn't something she was immediately able to do, but it also goes down to something as simple as reaching your neighbors in your neighborhood and just living intentionally so that you can share the gospel message with them. But whether it's a big or small calling, they all require us to feel confident that we know what we're doing so that we don't get held back and are afraid to actually go after what God is calling us to do. So that's the role of church leaders, to equip people to follow the calling that God has placed on them. And then third, just every person obeying that calling. Again, like we need to not just be focused on learning about who God is, but then actually be willing to do what he tells you to do. And this is where community is so important as well, because we're not called to go out and do things alone. We're called to go out in community to do them. And so with the support and encouragement of others, that's where we are able to do that. One thing I wanted to talk about in this idea of going out as missionaries in this context of what we're seeing here, these essentials of what it means to be a disciple or as a church. Where do we start? Like, where does an unbeliever start in this equation, in this kind of model? Because I think intuitively we think that a person has to start with like believing in God, and that's why a lot of our church strategies have focused on getting people to church, to come and hear the gospel message at church, for that to be the environment where people learn about him and worship him. But if you actually look back at scripture and see what Jesus did, where did Jesus start with his first disciples? Worship, community, mission. He went to his first disciples and he said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." He called them on mission as the first step. And what's really interesting about that is that they weren't believers. They didn't know who he was. Jesus was not Christ to them. He was not Lord. They would find that out later as they were on mission. And so I think that's a really important concept for us to keep in mind as we think about how we would go out as missionaries. And we start thinking about our calling. What is God calling us to? How do we go about doing it? The first disciples really started in community on mission. And I think that our strategy should be the same.